Okay, so thanks for having me, and thanks for letting me introduce to you the course that I taught. First of all, I would like to give you some background information on this class, but then I will talk about how podcasts can contribute, I think, to introducing new forms of teaching, but also new sets of skills for the students as well. And to start with this, I will share my screen with you. Just give me a second. All right, so the course I taught was basically an introduction to post-colonial thought. That means we talked about questions such as, what are post-colonial studies? How can they contribute to our understanding of history? And how can they contribute? What can we learn from post-colonial studies in the way that we look at current European identities and also at current European debates from a post-colonial perspective? The picture I'm showing you just now on this slide is one I used in our introductory session in January. It is a picture taken at the Congolese Independence Parade in 1960, taken by German photographer Robert Lebeck. And I think it kind of embodies, or it puts in a nutshell, what I think post-colonial studies can do, and that is they can shift our perspective. We can start to look at another part, another side, another perspective of history, not at the one where we concentrate or focus on European political power, but on the other side. And for example, in this picture, this means not focusing on King Baudouin of Belgium, the man in the white suit who is standing in the car, but at the Congolese student who just stole his ceremonial saber here. This course resulted in in 5 episodes, in 5 podcast episodes, each lasting from 18 to 24 minutes. And each of them includes interviews and other sound bites from documentaries, for example. And these episodes were produced based on topics that we discussed in class. And that means we all kept, and I in particular obviously kept notes from the discussions we had in class. And of the issues and questions that came up, and the students were then able to choose from these notes and from their own ideas what they were interested in working on in the podcasts. So each podcast was produced by 2 or 3 students in a group. And after our last session, students had 4 weeks to finalize their podcast, to produce them. That means actually choosing and finalizing the topic, conducting interviews with other people, writing the script, and also doing the editing. And the editing process was probably the part that was new to most students. And during these 4 weeks, I was closely involved with the script production, with the podcast production, for a number of reasons. The main reason was that this was the first time that students were working in this new medium. But there were obviously also technical questions to be answered. And what I think is also really important if you decide teaching podcasts or using podcasts in your classes is that the writing is very different from traditional academic genres, such as essays, for example, or term papers. And I think this takes up a lot of time and work to introduce students to this more popular, more audio-oriented writing. And to give you an idea of what these products in the end looked like, I will just switch to one example. And this is the 4th episode. We're going to listen to this bit for about a minute.
Postcolonial Europe, looking at European identities from a different perspective. A podcast.
Hello everyone, I am Helena.
And I'm Elisa, and you are listening to our episode on covert and overt racism and the Black Lives Matter movement in the UK. What you heard just now was the sound of Black Lives Matter protesters in Bristol toppling the statue of the former slave trader Edward Colston and throwing it into the river. This particular event occurred in June 2020 and was part of the global outrage following the killing of George Floyd in the US. But the British Black Lives Matter movement has a longer history.
So, Black Lives Matter UK is a coalition of black activists that came together in 2016 in response to police brutality in the UK.
Okay, let me just quickly get back to my presentation. Okay, as you just saw, the episodes each included a jingle that was, in this case, produced by me with music, in fact, produced by one of the students. So I'm very grateful we had that. And you could also kind of get an idea of what these podcasts included, and that is sound bites, in this case, from a TV documentary on the toppling of the statue of Edward Colston in Bristol this summer, but also the text the students produced and then recorded, and this you didn't hear, but there was, in this case, also a 10-minute interview episode or 10-minute interview part in the middle of this episode. So why podcasts, you might ask? I think podcasts are or can contribute to teaching because they are a collaborative project. That means students will have to work together, but each can focus on what they think they can contribute best. And this I think is particularly important in a transnational teaching environment such as EPICUR, because students will each contribute their own ideas, their own cultural, historical context, their own perspectives from their backgrounds. And each of these perspectives and ideas can find a place in a podcast. They can focus on the individual experiences of people. My second point is that I think podcasts encourage, or interviews in podcasts encourage students to interact with people outside of academia, who can share their political, their scientific, or their experiential knowledge with the students. And this means students will also have to learn to transfer their academic knowledge, their perspectives, their points of view to a new medium, but also a new audience. And with new audience, I'm also talking about the interview partner, because they will have to learn to explain, to communicate what they learn in class to others as well, and step outside this academic bubble, if you will. And this also means testing their own understanding of the topic, obviously. And the next point I'm going to spend a little bit more time on is the production part of things, because I kind of figure that is what most of your questions will be about later on. The good news is podcast production is really easy in a way. It does not involve a lot of technical skills. It does not involve a lot of equipment. And this is something that people like me who work for the public broadcasters, for example, have learned during the pandemic. You can easily produce good sound material from home. You do not necessarily need the perfect studio equipment, as you can see in these pictures. So podcast production, as I said, has a number of advantages. The equipment is easily available. If you do remote teaching, if you do video conferences, you basically have everything you need. You need a somewhat goodish sound quality in your computer microphone, for example. If you have an external microphone, that's even better, obviously. You need headphones, but there are also a lot of free, useful online tools, such as the editing program I asked students to use, which is called Audacity. For example, you can simply download that. It is really intuitive and easy to understand. There are obviously also some disadvantages. Podcast production is time consuming. You will need, on the teacher's side, you will need to spend time on explaining how editing works. On the student's side, this will mean spending quite a lot of hours on producing good sound, but also on producing clean editing. And this means that an introductory session, at least one introductory session, is necessary to help students get started with podcast production. And this is a bit of a side note, I think, but I honestly think this is important. Depending on the student's internet connection, broadband connection, and technical equipment, there are often huge differences in sound quality. And it is a bit of, it's like walking a thin line between grading the editing, grading the content of the podcast, and not grading the sound quality, because obviously students are not responsible for the equipment they have or they can afford. This is podcast production in a tiny nutshell, and I'm happy to take your questions on that, but this is it from me for the moment. Thank you.